AskReddit by Bernadette Swansongs. What's a fact that shocks you about a country's history? Slavery was still legal in several countries after the end of WWII. The last country to abolish it was Mauritania in 1981. And it is rarely enforced, so people are still doing it quite frequently. New Zealand produced a large amount of the Agent Orange that was used in the Vietnam War. There was also early testing of the chemical in Canada, New Brunswick's Gagetown. The Mongolian Empire had a lot of territory but didn't rule as long as you would think. History is filled with things like that. I think it's driven by what leaders and cultures make it into modern pop culture. Sparta was the dominant military power in Greece for like maybe 30 minutes 45 tops. The population of Ireland had dropped from 8 million before the famine to 2.7 million 25 years after the famine ended. It's extraordinary that the population of Ireland has yet to return to the level before the famine. Rutherford B. Hayes, a mostly forgettable US president, is actually a hero in Paraguay. He arbitrated a territorial dispute with Argentina that resulted in Paraguay getting around 60% of its modern territory. A Paraguayan department, state, is named President Hayes, its capital is Villa Hayes, and he even has a holiday named after him. This was a good one. Switzerland, known for its peace and neutrality, Switzerland actually has a long history of being a mercenary powerhouse. For centuries, Swiss soldiers were renowned for their skill and discipline, and they were hired by European powers throughout history. This even included the Pope. Switzerland is also famous for being very democratic. They are the only direct democracy. However, they didn't have universal suffrage at a federal level until 1971. Poland basically shifted a couple hundred km west immediately after WWII. There's also the forced migration of German speakers out of Eastern Europe after WWII, including many thousands who had been in the area for centuries. Pales in comparison to everything Germany did, of course, but many of those people had little to do with it. Son of the first democratically elected president of Iceland was a Nazi in the Waffen-SS. His father, president of Iceland, helped smuggle him home to Iceland through South America. The son had to hide in the basement while his father was entertaining foreign diplomats. The son never faced any punishment and died a free man in the 80s. He spent his later years as a tour guide for Germans. On the opposite end, it might not be surprising to learn that Hitler's nephew fought in WWII. But it might be a little surprising that he was part of the US Navy and was awarded a Purple Heart. Greece was in the Roman Empire longer than Italy. Similarly, Rome was a part of the Papal States longer than it was a part of the Roman Republic Empire. That the Dutch ate their prime minister. If you've had Dutch cuisine long enough, you'll understand. America once had a president named Martin Van Buren whose nickname was Old Kinderhook. Sounds like a grandpa you'd find napping on a porch swing. His nickname came from the town he was born in, Kinderhook, New York. Most people there, including Van Buren's family, were Dutch. Van Buren is the only American president who spoke English as a second language. France traded half of Canada to the British for a small Caribbean island, Guadeloupe maybe Dart. Few years later, France traded Tuscany to Spain for half the US, Louisiana Purchase. But just a few years later, he couldn't hold it down and sold the Louisiana Purchase to the newly formed USA for $15 million. The Caribbean island were fabulously wealthy at that time. It's well known that during the American War of Independence the French blockaded the American coast, ultimately leading to the British defeat. What's less known is that the British could have eased the blockade, but its fleet was defending Jamaica, which it feared losing more than the 13 colonies. After independence, that same French fleet sailed to the Caribbean to do exactly what the British feared and were resoundingly beaten. To be fair to the French, the Brits cheated by using groundbreaking technology, the copper-bottomed hull, to easily outmaneuver them. In Switzerland, women got the vote 53 years after Germany. Despite England being considered a bit quaint and old-fashioned by Americans, no one has been found guilty of witchcraft in London since 1944. Well, to be completely fair, no one at the time believed she was a witch. Issue was they had a medium making too many predictions that were a bit too close to the mark on developments to the war and damaging public moral, but they couldn't find anything else to arrest her on. Then someone found an obscure law that was never technically taken off the books. So they shut her up for a few months, and removed it after that. The fact Japan casually denies the rape of Nanking. Listen to an entire podcast, Hardcore History, about Japan's actions leading up to and during WWII. Fucking vicious. That's not spoken about enough. Latvia was a colonial power in Africa and the Caribbean. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/Curonian_colonization. The Romans used urine for washing and cleaning teeth. Very little risk in terms of sanitation, especially if you use your own. It's just not the flavor I fancy. The atrocities of my country in the Dutch East Indies. Cutting of hands, noses, breasts, putting salt in wounds, scaphism, you name it. The craziest thing is, the coolie system where plantation owners were free to kill or torture indentured laborers only ended in the 1930s. How many people died there of slavery or the coolie ordinances or the cultivation system is unknown, but the victims of the Dutch colonial wars conquests alone was around 4 million. I kind of wonder. Here in Belgium we had to learn about our colonial past, and that included the atrocities done in Congo during the Free State era. I still remember the black-white images printed on a teal background. We had to learn about the Dutch Volk too, but never really learned about atrocities they did. To what degree do you Dutch learn about the things you mention in school? South Korea was an extremely poor country up until about 1990. 1970s. 80s were the first decade of economic boom we experienced, and hence 1988 Olympics. Deleted. I read about that. It's cause during the first serving the explorers who brought them back knew they were edible cause they had seen the natives doing so and probably happily scoffed them themselves. But no one talked to the cooks about how they were to be prepared. Having never seen tomatoes before, they threw away the fruit and boiled the stalks in stews. The stalks actually are poisonous, and it caused all the rich nobles eating the meal to be horrifically sick. About my beautiful Brazil. The Portuguese conquered us first, but several countries ruled parts of our land. The Dutch, French, and Spanish were here too. The Dutch even ruled our northeastern lands for centuries. Huge parts of our country remain undiscovered. Inside Amazon and Atlantic forest there are new animal species, caves, ancient paintings and even indigenous tribes that keep getting discovered. The United States, a country known for immigration, actually banned Chinese immigration for over 60 years, from 1882 to 1943. This period is known as the Chinese exclusion era. Also see the immigration quota systems, similar time period, which targeted a variety of different immigrant groups and excluded them on ethnic and racial bases. Not much. All countries have skeletons in their closets. Millions of skeletons. And those skeletons have all sorts of bits and pieces missing or shattered. Yeah, but my country's skeletons aren't as bad as the others every country. Canadian healthcare has a long history of sterilizing indigenous women against their will, a practice that hasn't seen any decline and has been reported to have occurred as recently as 2019. This just another instance in a long list of genocidal actions Canada has taken against the indigenous people whose land they occupy. Can't mistreat your natives if you don't have them. The atrocities committed by Belgium in the Congo. I'd always thought of Belgium as a good country. Obviously not, at least at that period in history. There's no such thing as a good country.